Hey everyone, it is April. That means summer's around the corner and we got to get in shape. We got to be working out. We got to take care of ourselves. You're doing the good work of mental health and enjoying stuff by listening to this excellent podcast. And, we have so many great guests and they're brought to you by Simply Snacking. So you might as well benefit that company for believing in us here and bringing this content for you. So buy some of their beef snacks and beef jerky and chicken and farm raised healthy good stuff. We're going to be talking about a lot of this on the podcast. You might as well know what we're talking about, so go and enjoy that. Have it. If you have Simply Snacking, keep eating it and enjoying it, and keep your lifestyle healthy. And summer's coming. We got to get ready. Don't say I didn't warn you. All right, we'll talk to you soon. Thank you for listening and enjoy this episode. Hello and welcome back to the Life's Best Medicine and Low Carb MD. Yes, I'm running on them both because it's so important. I want everyone to kind of hear what we're talking about. And this is on a topic that is, well, one of them is really well known to me, but the other one, my awareness was raised by Siobhan Huggins, who some of you may know works with Dave Feldman. She's a brilliant scientist. And she kind of shared her struggles with lipedema, and it's a confusing topic because people get lipedema and lymphedema mixed up. So I thought I would help raise awareness by bringing two experts here and talking about how a ketogenic diet can help and how other lifestyle approaches can help. And this is a lot of you listening. You may be affected by this and you don't even know it, because me as a doc, I had no clue about it. I'd say, well, that's weird. Some people gain weight in weird places. And we think, oh, that's just where they store their fat. It's a little bit different than other people. We really need to focus on that. So people are doing all leg exercises to get their legs smaller and they realize it's not working. I'm getting a skinny waist. I'm getting skinny everywhere else. I might feel better, but the stuff I'm really trying to work on isn't changing, and it's so frustrating. So many people give up, and in my experience, I've seen they just say, forget it, I'm never going to lose weight, and they go through the struggles. And you two have done miracles with people and really brought attention. So I don't know who to start first. Leslyn Keith, tell everyone your credentials and what you're doing, and Catherine CEO, you're both with me. So tell everyone who you are and why you got interested in this topic.
Okay, so I'm Leslyn Keith. I'm an occupational therapist, and I'm a certified lymphedema therapist, but also treat lipedema. And we'll talk about those two conditions. But I heard about a ketogenic diet for my own self and my own family probably 10 or so years ago, and started using it for that. But I thought, I wonder if this would be really good for my patients, because an overwhelming majority of my patients were obese. And so I started using it for my patients. And then I thought, okay, I want to run a study about this. I want to see is this really good for lymphatic disorders like lymphedema and lipedema. So in order to do that, I had to go get my doctorate so that I have a school that would back me up and allow me to do the research. So I already knew my research that I wanted to do before I even enrolled in the doctorate program, and was able to do that completed that in 2015. And then I met Catherine at the NIH symposium on the first one they ever ran on lymphatic disorders. And I was presenting the results of my research about using a ketogenic diet for people who had lymphedema and were obese at the symposium. And Catherine and I immediately just looked at each other and said, I wonder if this will also work for lipedema as well. And that is the journey we started.
And how long ago was that?
We met in 2015 and we started working together in 2016.
Wow, and that was the first symposium we had on that in 2015. So that's nothing compared to what we've invested in so many other disease processes, including diabetes, that go back hundreds of years now, right?
Yes, and we work with another organization, Lymphatic Education and Research Network, and they helped get the symposium going with the NIH. And that's their continual battle right now, is to get the word out and to get the research done and to do more with NIH. So, and Catherine can talk more about that, but we need more research on it. And we are, Catherine and I are particularly focused on what we can do, not only with diet, but other lifestyle issues to help women with lipedema, because as we continue this conversation, you'll see that it is not very well known and not very well understood condition that afflicts many, many women around the world. And so we just feel like we need to do more.
In my second PhD I have here, Catherine, why don't you tell people about your background and how you got drawn into this spectrum?
Thank you so much for inviting us to be here and to begin to at least start spreading more about what lipedema is. My background is, my PhD is in psychology, but my concentration was in media. So I was looking at women and body image dissatisfaction since I myself have had a history of weight issues. And it was actually 2009, 2010, when I was hitting menopause, that my own unknown, undiagnosed mystery illness called lipedema surfaced. And it was at that point that I became quite ill and I needed to find some answers. And I went to so many specialists. I had an absolutely wonderful primary care physician who was as kind and knowledgeable and compassionate as you can imagine, but he'd never heard of it. He didn't know what it was. He didn't know what to do. All he knew is I had these symptoms. And I have to say that it was sheer determination not to end up in a wheelchair. So let me, if I can, let me step back for just a minute and describe what we're talking about. Lipedema is also called the painful fat disease. It is a disproportionate distribution of fat. It's not fat that can be treated like any other kind of fat because it is not receptive to diet and exercise. So many women will come to us and they have tried everything under the sun and nothing seems to work. Now, what's interesting, even bariatric surgery, is that women will tend, and I say women because 99.9%, it's hormonally related, it's metabolic, it's lymphatic, but there's such a big hormonal component that it tends to be mostly women. They'll lose weight in their torso, their waist will slim down, and they'll have disproportionate fat in the hips, in the buttocks, in the legs. It depends, it looks very different on different women. There are 4 stages. So stage 1 looks very different from stage 3. And there are 5 types. So a woman can have it in the thighs and the upper arms, but not the calves. Or someone can have it in the calves and in the buttocks, but not in the arms. So there's this very fluid, if you will, diagnostic process. And there are different symptoms, for instance, pain. Some women say that, you know, if one of our kids jump on our laps, it's like someone's pressing shards of glass into our legs. It's a very particular kind of pain, but it's not the same for everyone. Another thing, because of the permeability of the capillaries, is frequent bruising. So you'll see you have a black and blue, you have a hematoma, and it's like, where the heck did that come from? You know, I didn't bump into everything, but because of that fragility of the capillaries, we're very susceptible to that kind of hematoma. So the thing that I found, so I'm going to swing back, the thing that I found is that no one had the answers. And so I began a journey myself. I went to Europe. I ended up finding anybody who knew anything about lymphedema And by virtue of lymphedema, some knew about lipedema. There was a number of doctors in Germany. Most of them were in Germany, though I met with different docs in England and in the Netherlands and in Italy. So there are quite a few more than there were when I started in 20. My first trip was 2012.
Yeah, on a discovery tour, and it's an important diagnostic criteria you're talking about. Siobhan was nice enough when we were at the conference. Come here and feel me, feel my arms, feel this, feel it, and you can feel the difference between that and typical fat, right? With the scar tissue and the fibrosis, and also, you know, another thing for people listening, you may say, gosh, the fat in my legs is really, really tender, but the one in my abdomen doesn't hurt at all when someone with my child touches me there or stuff. So you could feel a difference. They'll say, oh my gosh, it's tender. So I've had two women come to me in particular recently, and they were diagnosed with fibromyalgia because they had tenderness, you know, all over. But they said you only have fibromyalgia in your legs. It's like, well, I don't think that's the diagnosis, right?
Absolutely.
I've talked to so many women too that you ask them if they have pain, and like if they're really hypersensitive to touch. And some of them don't even realize the pain they have. They think everybody finds getting your blood pressure taken is excruciatingly painful. That's just how it is when you get your blood pressure taken. They have no idea that actually that what they are experiencing is much more severe than what other people typically experience.
Yeah, and I've had people that, well, they're having it in their arms, and they say, well, it's more comfortable if you do my leg, it doesn't hurt at all, but if you do my arm, it hurts like crazy. And he's like, well, come on, you know, what can it be? And you realize, oh, this is what it is. This is why we're so sensitive. So, you know, that's definitely something to be mindful of.
So let me just say, because Leslyn mentioned it, up until when Leslyn and I met in Leslyn's research, which she presented at that conference at NIH, you know, there were no real treatments that worked. And we have added many other aspects because we have a holistic approach, but the breakthrough was about the ketogenic way of eating and how it began to work, because we didn't know if it was going to work or not. We just, you know, based on Leslyn's research, there was significant results that it worked with lymphedema and with obesity, but lipedema is another diagnosis.
Maybe one of you can just, so for people who aren't familiar with either, just give a brief description of what lymphedema is versus lipedema. Just so people understand what we're talking about, because there's people afflicted with both, and some people have both, and in later stages, lipedema can become lymphedema also. So how do we well, for people listening, if they're saying, I wonder which one I have big legs, but what's causing it? Can we differentiate that out a little bit for them?
Yeah, Leslyn's the one to take that one.
Sure. So lymphedema is actually, it's a lymphatic disorder that actually has a adipose tissue or a fat tissue component, but it's largely that the lymphatic system is not running properly, either from being born with a poorly lymphatic system is not formed properly, or you've had some kind of surgery, typically cancer treatment, where they remove lymph nodes, and parts of the lymphatic system get damaged from radiation treatments. So what happens is now the lymphatic system is supposed to be removing all the fluid from the tissue. And when your system is not working right, then it leaves it behind and you get swelling. And so one way to tell a difference between lymphedema and lipedema is that lymphedema is always asymmetrical. So you could have it in both of your legs, but one leg is going to be larger than the other. It's not symmetrical. Versus lipedema, if you have it, it's going to be in both legs and they're going to be symmetrical. But then it gets a little bit tricky that if, as you were saying, Brian, that as you progress in the stages of lipedema, you might develop lymphedema, and now one of your legs is going to be bigger than the other. And so other ways that we test too is that we test for pitting. And so that means if I'm going to press in on the tissue where I see this enlargement, it's going to, if it's lymphedema, it's going to leave a depression. It's going to leave a thumbprint there. And for lipedema, you will press it in and you could hold it for, you know, a minute or two, and you pull your thumb away and there is no thumbprint. But she will probably tell you that really hurt to do that. So,
exactly.
So if we see someone who is symmetrical fat deposition, mostly to the lower body, and they're really tender to touch, they have easy bruising, and it's triggered at times of hormonal flux like puberty, pregnancy, or menopause, then we start thinking lipedema. But now, okay, on top of that, we have some asymmetry. One of the legs is larger than the other, and the larger leg has some pitting. Now we've got lymphedema along with the lipedema.
And also another way we could tell too sometimes with lipedema is that the ankles are spared. So you could be really big legs and then your ankles are thin and your feet aren't swollen either, right?
Right. So that usually the hands and the feet both will be totally unaffected. But as they get lymphedema, then we start seeing swelling on the backs of the hands and on the top of the foot. Yeah.
One of the mysteries that I think working with Leslyn has solved is many women will report eating very little and not being able to lose weight, or in fact, even gaining weight. And there's a process that a researcher at Sloan Kettering did a lot of work on, Marara, on adipogenesis, where that the fat tissue absorbs the lymphatic protein, the proteins in the lymphatic fluid that doesn't get processed, that the adipose tissue is actually absorbing that protein as if you were actually eating food when you're not. And so it's a very complex set of circumstances.
So on biopsy, do we see a bunch of hypertrophy of the fat cells there where they get bigger, like the balloons blow up like crazy, or are there just more fat cells there that are smaller? Or have we looked at that?
And I think that that needs to be examined more. And there has been a lot of research, just like in the last 10 years, on lipidemas. There's more and more, but it's still, you know, there's still so many unknowns. So one thing that they're finding is that they're calling it almost sick fat because we're seeing increased macrophage infiltration, and really the adipocytes themselves are not healthy. There's hypoxia, so you're not getting air, you're not getting oxygen to the fat cells. There is inadequate nutrients being brought in, and also evacuation of waste is not happening. So, but the amount of hypertrophy versus hypoplasia or excessive fat tissues being built up, that I don't think has been determined on what is the actual what's the histology of a fat tissue for a woman with lipedema. That we still need to look at. We do know there's a lot of fibrosis, and what you were talking about, Brian, about palpating Siobhan's arm, you know, and the fat tissue there, you can feel these little nodules quite often with lipedema. And it may even, the tissue might have like a corrugated appearance because of the fibrosis. So it's, I think what a lot of us may have called in the past cellulite. So kind of that mattressy kind of look because of the scar tissue, and then you squeeze it and, you know, palpate, and you're going to feel these nodules. It could be grains of rice all the way up to larger, like grape size or larger fatty fibrotic nodules.
Exactly. So you could feel that, and you feel those fibrosis in there too. And so there's so many things that we can look at. And I think some people might be feeling their arms right now saying, well, feel your arm compared to your stomach. Do you feel a little different? And the love handles are a little bit different than in your arms. And you can feel like these uneven areas, right? These little nodules underneath, and the implant, plus the tenderness also is going to be different for a lot of people. So hopefully just listening, people say, oh my goodness, I think I have lipedema. I need to go get checked out. The problem has been, the standard approach to treating it has been, okay, you're going to diet and exercise, right? And we're going to get all this, but it's hard when your legs are hurting and you're in pain. So what are things we can do, someone who's struggling right now? For instance, with lymphedema after a mastectomy, for instance, when they take the lymph nodes and that left arm swollen or right arm swollen, they'll use pressure devices, compression, and that seems to help. And my understanding is that with lipedema also is very helpful to have compression. And so what are we doing now? Cosmetically and therapeutically to help people?
It's a really multifactorial approach. As we have both said, when we began to look and experiment with the ketogenic way of eating, there were results almost instantly. And the kind of results is, yes, there was weight loss, sometimes more, sometimes less, but the things that women reported were a decrease in pain. One woman, actually from Texas, she reported to us that within 10 days, she got out of bed every morning and the first thing that she would experience was the pain in her legs. And she said that painkillers were no longer touching it. And after 10 days, she said she got out of bed and she was like, something's wrong.
Yeah, I'm not in pain. What's going on here?
She realized she wasn't in pain, and she went on to lose almost 100 pounds. But the issues are that a lot of these symptoms, swelling, which is a very foundational symptom for lipedema, is the edema itself, the fat swelling. It starts to decrease visually. You can see over a very short period of time. Leslyn, you mentioned numerous other examples in your books. Why don't you refer to a couple of those?
Yeah, and what Catherine is saying too is that these decrease in symptoms happens before there's been any weight loss. And so, because I think originally it was hypothesized that if they could just lose the weight, if they can just get rid of this sick fat, then everything would be okay. But traditional ways of doing it with intense exercise and low calorie, low fat dieting seems to make everything worse. And so that wasn't an option. And so then they went to, we'll do liposuction. And really, I mean, immediately post procedure, there was a huge decrease in pain, but now they were, the potential downsides of doing that kind of surgery. Now they had that problem. So when we found, just anecdotally, and after 10,000 anecdotes, you start to think you got something there. Just anecdotally, women were telling us that this is what's happening. We had really no idea what to suggest, what specifically. Follow a ketogenic diet. We're going to use this one that's been used for epilepsy. Okay, we're going to use that for you. And within a very short time, before there's any weight loss, before they even had any measurement decreases, then we stopped seeing that capillary fragility, not bruising as easily. The pain was severely reduced or even gone. The swelling was down, and lipedema, they typically have that non-pitting swelling, but they just felt less bloated. The tissue was looser. So all these things were changing, within a month or two or less before they had even lost weight. But then, and so many women find this to be the most important thing. What is the scale saying? So we started seeing that too, but not just on the trunk. They were losing it on a lower body. And we started having people, take pictures, because sometimes the scale doesn't change much, but you can have a completely different looking body. And so people were taking pictures, and this, 6 months before after pictures. And Catherine and I were just going, I think this really works.
Yeah, that's so exciting when you see something, especially when people have lost hope. These people have tried everything and they're frustrated and nothing works. And, it's like a losing cause. I'm restricting myself so much. And, you know, one of the things we see on the ketogenic diet in particular with heart failure or with lymphedema is their swelling goes away really very quickly. And a lot of people don't understand the physiology of high insulin levels contributing to salt retention in the kidneys, holding on to fluid. So people who go on a ketogenic diet who are eating terrible, they're the ones you hear about that lose 30 pounds right away, but that's liquid weight for the most part. It's not necessarily getting their fat stores yet. But the other people who've been eating healthy the whole time look at it, how come I don't lose 30 pounds right away? Well, that's an exception to the rule because they're very metabolically sick generally. If their insulin is running 98 and we get them down to a 20, is going to be a lot different than if you're running at 20, we get you down to a 16 or something like that, as far as the effect on blood pressure and kidneys and all that kind of stuff. And you know, I honestly haven't looked at the data with lipedema with regard to visceral fat associations with that and high insulin level, or is it just a local phenomenon, right? That they're not necessarily metabolically sick, even though they may look like it to people, basically.
Yeah, and what we're seeing right now is that it seems to be, until you develop abdominal obesity, lipedema is a presentation that is more metabolically healthy. But we're also wondering is, you know, for instance, they're saying, oh yeah, the glucose level is fine, and you know, we're not seeing the lipid panel looks fine, but are we really testing and quantifying it correctly? Are we missing people who actually are hyperinsulinemic or are pre-diabetic, and we're not catching that? But so far, the data that's been collected is that women with lipedema tend to have low triglycerides, tend to have, you know, a normal A1C. I don't think insulin is tested very often, so we don't have those numbers. And interestingly, another very common comorbidity is hypothyroidism.
Exactly. And Siobhan has been talking about that too, and the correlations with that, you know. And I think there's so much we're going to learn. Look at the gut microbiome, how much does that affect it? How much does stress levels and being in chronic pain, the cortisol being elevated, insulin being elevated in those settings, or you can't sleep well because your legs are hurting. All these things are a big cycle that we know. All these things are very important for our overall health. And when you're struggling with one thing really bad, you know, like chronic pain, then the rest of your life, you know, mood, everything gets affected, you know. And we know even that people who are stressed all the time, their gut microbiome gets messed up and their stress hormones go up and they crave more food, and then, you know, saying, forget it, I've given up, you know, I feel good when I'm eating more. And then you kind of get to that point, it's like, what's the use at some point, you know? And that's why you don't want people just to give up.
I'm really glad you said that, because what we found is that we have to have a holistic approach working with the ladies. It's like that it is not only physical. Physical is very critical. You know, diet, exercise, all the things that we do for self-care, sleep. I said exercise, but just walking, movement, going to the pool, you know, all of that is critical. But there's also a mental and psychological aspect, and emotional.
Self-esteem, yeah. All those things play a huge role, right?
Yeah, a huge role. An emotional aspect, a spiritual aspect, because it incredibly impacts a woman's self-image and how she perceives herself and her identity. And there's a spiritual component and a social component, because so many women, especially those who are in the morbid obese category, they tend to isolate. And so having a spiritual and social and emotionally healthy and psychologically healthy and physical community makes a difference.
And having a community that gets it, because they're going through the same thing. When you think you're the only one struggling with this, you're on an island by yourself, and it's really a scary place to be. When you find out there's thousands and thousands of people in the same boat as you, then you start to feel like, okay, I'm not just a freak of nature. I mean, this is a common thing around the world, and it's nothing you're doing wrong. It's just what you got, right?
Actually, millions.
Millions. Yeah.
Estimate is that 11% of women have lipedema, and if you can track back to ancient Byzantine figurines, and you can see the lipedema shape. So it's not something that's brand new. It's something that's been around for a very long time.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, again, I think I'm glad we raised this point of saying, just because you may be grossly overweight appearing doesn't mean you're metabolically sick. It doesn't mean that you have diabetes. And as a matter of fact, I would just, by my clinical experience, I'd say, look, you're less likely, like we're seeing, less likely to have diabetes and metabolic disease, because you're storing that fat. Instead of it storing in your energy, in your blood vessels where you're going to get diabetes, it's shoving it all into your fat stores. So you could be 400 pounds, and I've seen it. I see people that are 400 pounds that have normal insulin, normal triglycerides. Then I see people who are very thin that look healthy. You go, this is a healthy person. Then you see their insulin's through the roof and they're metabolically very sick, but they burned it off through exercise and other things, even though, you know, they're at higher risk of cardiovascular disease than someone who could weigh 3 times what they weigh.
Mm-hmm.
So I think just to bringing that awareness to people and understanding.
Yeah, and you know, awareness to the medical providers, because so many of these women, sometimes anti-fat bias is the worst in healthcare. And so many of these women are going to their physician, and the physician is saying, you know what, you're just fat. You need to stop eating. And that's as much guidance as they give them, which is not maybe good guidance for someone who has simple obesity, but it definitely is worthless for a woman who has lipedema. And it may just keep her from seeking medical attention when she needs it, because that's the kind of attitude that she's faced with.
Yeah, there's a huge bias that way, and the doctor is assuming you're not listening, you're cheating, you're going and eating bonbons every night, and you're not exercising, and they're really working hard, and that's why it's so frustrating, because you know, especially when they're losing weight in other places and they're just not losing it in places that you might see, right? And so it's really a frustrating thing. So when people come to terms that they can do better, and you know, along those lines, Leslyn, what about as far as the ketogenic diet that you're recommending for patients? Are you finding, because the reason I ask this question is because Siobhan has done very well with weight loss and she's changed her life, and she tends towards a higher fat ketogenic diet than most of my patients would be on. Do you find that with lipedema, people do better on a higher fat diet than, say, like a what they would call a protein sparing modified fast, or eating a high protein to energy ratio that has become a little bit more popular recently? Is there one that seems to work better for your patients?
Well, we have some general guidelines that we discuss, and definitely some patients are going to do better with staying to the high fat, but we found in general that it's going to be not high fat at all, and we are going to encourage protein intake, and hopefully animal sources of protein, which are superior to plant sources of protein. And so we really focus on encouraging the protein intake, keeping the carbs to 20 grams total carbs or less per day, and filling in with fat. And when we first started with like the epilepsy plan, that it was, you know, any fat, and add butter to stuff, and, you know, make the bulletproof coffee and stuff like that. But we really moved away from that, because there is some figures that as many as 80 or over 80% of women with lipedema also have obesity. And so what we're finding, and maybe you found this in your practice too, is that we're not encouraging that high fat intake. Instead, use your own fat stores. And what we're not sure of is, are we accessing the lipedema fat stores, or are we only accessing the simple obesity fat stores? That we don't know yet. That is yet to be found. But we found that, you know, we don't really need to focus on hitting a certain macro for fat intake. Just go to satiation, and then other little tweaks like really not using nut flours, not using artificial sweeteners, and really, sorry, Catherine.
No seed oils.
And no seed oils. So it's really going towards those healthy fats.
Maybe a higher omega-3 to omega-6 ratios, and trying to eat healthier from that standpoint. Yeah, I'll tell you, I'm interested. The reason I'm interested is I have a patient that at my old practice, before I switched over to what I'm doing now, we put her on a ketogenic diet. and she did really great, lost a lot of weight, and she happens to have lipedema. I didn't know at the time, but now that I'm saying, oh yeah, you got lipedema, that's your problem. But what was interesting, I said, okay, when I switched over to my new practice, I said, we're going to put you on we're going to let you burn your own fat. We're not going to add fat, that same mindset. I said, we're not going to add fat. We're going to do a more protein based, like cut out the processed food, seed oils, all these things we talked about. And she's plateaued and struggled and struggled and struggled. Plus I couldn't get her to exercise, which was a frustrating part of it. And, ultimately I said, let's sit down. It's not working. Like, you're not getting results. What were we doing before different? She goes, I was having fat bombs all the time. You told me not to eat fat bombs. I go, okay, let's just go back to that a little bit, just see what happens. She starts losing weight again. So it may be an individual thing, and it may be that we're like you're saying, we're dealing with the lipedema fat is going to respond differently than the general fat that we would see. So maybe she's losing fat in a different place. Well, we don't know where it's coming from, but we know you're losing weight, so it's working, whatever we're doing. Then maybe toning that down a little bit once, and it may have to do with insulin levels and insulin resistance and all this kind of stuff. And that's why I'm intrigued, saying, hey, if we try some different approaches, maybe we can really help people out, to figure out, oh, doing a lower level exercise where you're burning fat as your primary fuel source may be better than doing interval training in this population, perhaps. Or how do we change the sugar cravings, and how do we deal with the gut microbiome? So it's exciting that if we all put our minds together, we can start looking at these things, and then also, of course, focusing on the psychological aspects, because I think that's a huge deal.
One of the aspects that's been very useful has been either intermittent fasting or alternate day fasting, small extended fasts, like, maybe 72 hours, something like that, and not every week, maybe once a month, and there's been some ability to move stalls using that in combination. The other is that a number of us have I tried it for a particular purpose, is mostly animal sources, and going carnivore. I was mostly vegetarian and pescatarian for over 25-30 years. So the idea of entertaining meat as a source was very difficult, to say the least. But it ended up being a solution when I was in a place where I needed to have a hip replacement, which is also part of lipedema, by the way, because the gait is off because of the maldistribution of fat. So anyway, a carnivore and intermittent fasting and alternate day fasting and extended fasting all worked for me to get what I needed to have happen in order to have surgery. But I'm not the only one. It's like there are different ways, because I like to say that each one of us is unique. I mean, I think that's true, period, across, just people, but for sure for those of us who struggle with lymphatic disorders and fat disorders, because, one would look or think, you just do this and it'll work. So how come somebody can go on a low-cal diet and they lose weight and not a big deal, but you can't? Or how come some women can have dairy as part of their keto, and others, as soon as they have dairy, they gain weight, even if everything else is the same? So there are just these oddities, if you will.
Yeah, and that's where close monitoring and saying, okay, this isn't working, let's change course, let's try cutting dairy, let's try going up on your dairy, let's try, and there's so many things we can try, and that's why it's fun when you have someone who's really motivated. There's things we can find. What I'm finding in my practice, which is surprising to me now, is and looking at the data for high cortisol, high insulin level, because stress is a killer. Like when I look at my patients who aren't doing well, they're stressed out, they're tense, they don't have time. That's a common denominator. They don't have time to cook, they don't have time to prepare, they got kids, they're a real estate agent who's stressed out, middle-aged, hormonal, all these things. And you go, okay, what do we do in that case? But some of the things I'm reading about and looking and say, what do I do with a stressed out person? I can't say, well, you're stressed out, that's why you're not losing weight. Well, we got to figure out, what do we do? Can we simplify our life? And it's always, by the way, the caregivers who are trying to worry about everyone else except themselves. And if they sit there and meditate for 10 minutes, they feel guilty because they should be doing something, right? Like, I'm one of those people too. And so you start realizing, take a breath, take it easy a little bit. Don't overthink this. Don't weigh yourself 20 times a day. Let's just trust the process, and you lower those stress hormones. Guess what else does? Believe it or not, cold exposure lowers cortisol level, and it can help with some stress hormones, and your body calms down after that. Heat exposure, like infrared sauna, raises melatonin levels. It increases nitric oxide release, which helps prevent heart attacks and strokes and all this. And then we have data on this, preventing Parkinson's, Alzheimer's disease. And it's, you go in the sauna for 10 or 15 minutes if you're medically cleared to do that. And so there's a lot of interesting data and basically evidence of heart failure and lymphedema getting better by getting some of the toxins out, lowering the sodium levels, things like that. So I think there's a lot of options that we're going to figure out and say, oh, maybe, using leg squeezers, pressure squeezers on the legs, and that may make it worse, may make it better. But I think as we put our minds and say, let's see what works, like having someone like you, Leslyn, who's saying, okay, let me try this with a patient, let's see what happens with this individual. And when it starts working, say, oh, let's try trying this with 2 patients now, or 3 patients. And then you that's how we do it. These, like you said, everyone will criticize anecdotes, but it's like, for me, that anecdote is a life, right? Someone's life is saved or it got better because they're an anecdote, but hopefully they become the standard of care, right? When we start looking at this data.
Yeah, what we tell our women in our groups that participate and do webinars and stuff like that with us is that you are an experiment of one. And you're experimenting on yourself, hopefully with the guidance of a knowledgeable medical provider who understands lipedema and also understands ketogenic nutrition that can help you do that. But you are your own experiment. And it's amazing. We've had over 10,000 women who've been willing to experiment with this. So that's how we're kind of collecting anecdotal data from this, and all the pictures and everything that they publish on our social media sites and stuff like that. It's like you say, pretty soon this is evidence. It seems to be what's working, and it's kind of taking the world by storm. And now we've got other clinicians that are using this in their clinic in Europe and the US and Canada and Australia. And they're doing actual bona fide research studies, and they're publishing the information. And I would say there's even more information on using keto for lipedema right now than there is on keto for lymphedema, which is where I originally started. There is, in Norway, they did a little pilot study. I just saw something that came out of Russia, but I haven't been able to translate it yet. In Germany, we have a clinician who's been doing it there for 15 years with lipedema. So there's more and more information getting out, and the medical establishment that's opposed to this way of eating is starting to lose ground. They don't have a leg to stand on to say that we shouldn't be doing this, that it's dangerous to do this long term,
And are you finding, like, when you try low fat, vegan diet, low fat diet, all these things, are you seeing that the ketogenic, in your opinion, is superior to any other diet you've tried with these patients?
Yes. Hands down. Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And compliance, because the argument is always like, oh, people can't do this restricted diet forever. Like, I have people who've been doing it for 20 years and they seem pretty happy to me.
Yeah.
Especially if your lipedema is getting better, your lymphedema is getting better, your quality of life's getting better, and mood gets better. We're seeing all these things. You go, well, why is it not sustainable feeling better than you did when you were, suicidal a while back?
Right. We have a woman who spoke at our last symposium. She's lost 268 pounds in the past 2 years. And she tried everything. And it's been wonderful. And that's not uncommon. We have a number of ladies who've lost 100 pounds, 150 pounds, 200 pounds. Again, yeah.
And speaking of symposium, let's talk about who's talking this symposium. Tell people about this. The longest symposium I've ever been a part of it, the name at least. So tell people what the symposium.
Not long and how long you're going to be attending it, but to say the title of it, it is a long title.
I was like, oh, that's my whole slide. I use my whole slide just putting the title. I was like, wow, but it's super important because you're putting both of the topics. And so tell people who aren't aware of it, like how they can attend the conference and who's going to be speaking. Whoever wants to take that one.
Yeah, sure. And Siobhan Huggins and I are the co-directors of it. But really, Catherine is the mistress of it all. She really pulls everything all together to put this together. But the title that you're talking about is The Ketogenic Revolution for Lipedema and Lymphedema. And Siobhan and I came up with that because we really do feel like this is a revolution in the care of lymphatic and fat disorders. So we're excited about that. And of course, we have you speaking there. We have Dr. Eric Westman, Megan Ramos. I'm going to look at my list here to see all the various people. Amy Berger. So these are people that you might be familiar with.
Yeah, these are all top-notch people that I know, yes.
Yes, Brett Scher, Paul Mason. And then we have several people, Ken Berry, Amber O'Hearn. But then we also have several people that are known in the lymphatic or lymphology field that will also be speaking. Myself and Catherine, Dr. Gabrielle Ferber from Germany, who uses this in her clinic. We have a nutritionist from Poland who uses this in her clinic. So a lot of wonderful people. And then we also we will have what we call patient panels. So people who have lymphedema, lipedema, or both. And they're going to be talking about how ketogenic nutrition has transformed their life and helped them manage their condition much, much better. This symposium that we're doing in April that you're speaking at is really focused on the ketogenic side of managing the conditions. In October, we will be having another symposium, and that is, as Catherine was talking about, is going to focus on the holistic approach. And so we'll have speakers that are going to be talking about all different aspects of care, including ketogenic nutrition.
Yeah, I think that's so important because we have to treat the whole patient, right? The mood problems and the anxiety and the stress, and what we've learned, being criticized all the time, and like you said, getting over that fear of going to the doctor saying, oh gosh, here we go again, they're going to criticize me. And it makes me so sad. I hear that all the time, that patients say, I hate going to the doctors because every time they're judging me and they're telling me that I'm not doing what they said. And it's so hard. A doctor's listening, look, be kind to people. It's not that hard, and listen to what they're saying, because we want to talk a lot. As you can tell, we like to talk, but I think it's really important to be able to listen and say, okay, what's going on? What have you tried? What's worked? What hasn't worked? And then we try to figure out a game plan. Do you hate fish? Okay, I'm not going to tell you to eat fish every day. If you hate red meat, I'm not going to tell you to eat red meat. Let's try to see what works for you in your life long term, right? And then addressing all these things. So I'm so excited that Amy Berger, she's a voice of reason, and Megan understands fasting. She works with Jason Fung, for people who don't know. And so all these people, Eric Westman, who's a world leader in ketogenic diet, who I'm going to pick on a little bit this weekend, actually, at a conference I'm going to. But I think it's having all these minds together from their aspect, and everyone contributing and saying, here's what's working in my clinic, what are you seeing in your clinic? And then we can change course when we need to. And I think we'll realize, again, that it's more individualized, but these other things that can help. As far as a modality for people who are really at wit's end and they're looking at, does liposuction work long term, or do they get the same pathology come back in 2 or 3 years after they get treatment? I just don't know. That's why I'm asking.
It's a really good question, Brian. It's very dependent. The way I say that all of us are unique. Surgery can work. It's dependent on, are you a good candidate? Where are you in the disease process? Are you stage 1, 2, 3, 4? What is your weight? Some of the doctors say it doesn't matter, but we find that in fact it does. Do you have realistic expectations? If you're going into surgery expecting a magic wand, it isn't a magic wand. A number of women have reported that the fat redistributes itself. So fat that has been liposuctioned out of the lower portion of the body, all of a sudden fat starts to grow on the torso area, in the trunk, in the upper arms, and up the shoulder area, and breasts. One woman went up 2 sizes in her cup size post liposuction. So there are considerations.
And also, I would assume along those lines, if you're doing a ketogenic diet and if you're eating terrible after you get liposuction, you're going to have a lot worse outcome than if you're eating healthy and trying to maintain what you've accomplished, right? And I think the other point is, if people are predisposed or they're in the early stages, can we prevent the more drastic complications by getting on early with a ketogenic diet, decreasing inflammation, decreasing the lymphedema? Can we impact the long-term course, as if with diabetes, where we can prevent that from happening, right? If we catch it earlier and we're cognizant of what's happening.
That's actually what I always say when people consult with me, is always start with a conservative program. Do a conservative program, which also, by the way, you mentioned earlier, does include compression garments, does include manual lymphatic drainage, can include some of those decongestive therapies, in addition to a well-formulated ketogenic way of eating. And, and if surgery is part of a woman's journey, great, but you want to have all of the pieces in place. They're foundational. And while surgery might impact a woman's life with volume, but still, in order to maintain it, you have to manage it. It's a lifelong process. You have to manage it.
Yeah, we're definitely finding that women can have a really good success with all of our supports for doing a holistic approach, including diet, and then they still choose to have surgery. For instance, sometimes, that the size is just so large that they've lost mobility and all kinds of stuff. So the surgery is still part of their plan, but now they've set themselves up for success by making all these lifestyle changes, including diet, prior to surgery. And so they'll have a lot better outcome.
And people don't realize that just the mechanical effects of your legs rubbing together, like how are you going to exercise when your legs are rubbing together and you get raw and you're chafed and it's miserable. So surgery can help you in that standpoint of saying, okay, let me get to the point where I can be, because if you're carrying 30 pounds in your legs, that's hard to move around. And so maybe that allows you to have a better lifestyle too. Maybe frees you up a little bit to be more active, have more energy, and not be in such pain all the time. So all these are really important things. I'm really excited about the conference. I'm really glad that you're doing this, because we really do need to raise awareness. And so people know it's like, oh, it's not just because I'm eating too many cookies sometimes that's causing this problem. There's physiologic reasons for this. And I think once you understand that better, then we can attack the problem and not blame everyone and say, okay, let's see what we can do to make things better for you.
The thing that happens, and I think it's really worth emphasizing, it's that what the patients, those with lipedema and lymphedema and lymphatic and fat disorders, they blame themselves. They are, at some very fundamental level, they think it's something I'm doing. It's my fault. Somehow I'm doing something wrong. And one of the biggest responses that we get from, women who come and, engage with us is, you mean it's not my fault? You mean it's not my fault? Really?
Well, it's not a moral weakness. Like so many people, they can starve themselves for so long, and sooner or later your body's hunger centers and satiety centers get screwed up and your emotions get screwed up, and then your body does what it's, because your body wants to survive. And if it's starving, it's going to do everything it can to keep you from starving. Your body wants to help you, believe it or not, people. It's pretty dang smart, how it compensates for all this stuff. So when you try to force something forever that's not working for you and you're starving yourself, it's really your body's trying to tell you, look, let's do it a long sustained time and take our time and not do something totally drastic where where your body's going into some kind of shock mode. And, the example I use for that is these boxers, they box and they're in a 148 weight class and they get a little older and they have a few drinks here and there. And then all of a sudden they're trying to get down that weight. They can't get there anymore. And then they're 158, then 168. But these are people who are working out at a high level and eating healthy for the most part. But the body says, nope, not going there again. I'm not going to let you starve me to death again and torture me and work out 7 hours a day. And so those kind of things that we all kind of get, the biggest loser phenomenon that we see. We like so many people I know, one of my ladies, she's great. She goes, look, I could eat glass for a month. It will help me lose weight. I'll eat whatever you tell me to eat. But at 31 days, I lose my mind. And this is my trend. I eat everything again. So being too restrictive can be a problem. For some people say, hey, if I can have a piece of sourdough bread every couple of weeks, is that okay? And then after a month or two, they say, I really don't need it anymore, because they made that conscious decision rather than this darn willpower thing, right? If they're making that decision, go, no, it's not worth it. I'm trying to get to my goal. So we all can do that. We can, and by the other side of the token, one of my patients today, she's been so militant that she's just miserable. I go, relax a little, right? If you have a piece of bread and you can handle it, go for it. If it's going to make you, but you're not a bad person if you have a piece of bread every now and again, right? Or you have pizza at your kids, bar mitzvah or something. Don't worry about it. And then, try to get back on track as much as possible. And if you can't get back on track, we got to talk and try to figure that out. But, I think this, like, you can stress every ounce and every pound, and the stress makes things so much, you're like dragging a bunch of weight on your shoulders going uphill. It's, like, let's just go on flat ground for a little while until we get you, ready for the next hill that's going to come up. So I think all these kind of things are important. And I have to ask you both, since you're doing such great work, I'll make Catherine go first. Like, what's life's best medicine for you? What gets you out of bed? What motivates you? If you say, hey, look, guys, here's what's important in life. I always like to have our guests say that, because so many times it's just what we do publicly that people know, but just knowing, hey, what makes you tick? Where do you get your joy? Where do you get your peace? Those kind of things.
That's a good question, Brian. For me, it goes back to relationship. There's so many amazing people in my life, and I get to be with people that I respect, that I have good conversations with. And I have people, as I said, our holistic approach, we have a meditation group. As a group, we get together to meditate twice a month. And the kinds of things that, are just about the quality of every day. That's
great. That's so important. Those are really important things. Leslyn, I'm not going to let you off the hot seat here.
Well, and Catherine knows me. I'm much more of a either intellectual or physical person, and so I love to write. I do lots of writing, but on the physical side, two things that I do that gives me a lot of joy. One is I juggle, and so we have a group of us that get together every Saturday at a local park, and we throw things at each other. And so we do that, and then
but they catch it. They not only
and we catch it.
Yeah. Not throw it. Yeah. You actually catch it and throw it back at them. And wow, that's awesome. You're my first juggler, I think, on the podcast. Wow, cool.
And the other thing that I do is I boat, and so my guy and I own a little bayliner boat, and we like to hang out all summer on our boat. So that's my two things.
That's great. And I know you like helping people because you're doing a lot of good work in an area that's underserved and people don't understand. And, you must, just not knowing you yet, but I can tell just by talking, you have compassion, you want to help people, and then go juggle on the weekends and get on your boat. Do you juggle on the boat too when there's rough seas, or no?
Yeah, that's a problem with losing things overboard when we do that. But I will say, because my other joy is writing, that's pretty much what my writing is focused on, has to do with lymphatic and fat disorders, and really towards the use of ketogenic nutrition. And so and I'm hoping that by doing the writing that I'm reaching even more people that will have access to the information.
Yeah, that's great. And I think having this symposium and raising awareness and having, minds come together from different areas of medicine and psychology and all these things are so critical, to start understanding, because some of these things just people just don't understand it. So there's no attention paid to it. So as far as the symposium, who's going to give me the date and the time and how people sign up, and can they watch it if they're out that weekend? Can they be doing it at a later time and catch up on it?
Yeah, so it is going to be April 29th and 30th and May 1st. So Friday and Saturday is a 2-day symposium, and we have an advanced post-symposium workshop on Sunday. And so you can go to Lipedema-Simplified.org. And in the events section, there's a link that goes to Ketogenic Revolution. I'm giving you the easy way because the link, I sent it to you in the chat. It's learn.lipedema-simplified.org/keto/revolution-2022. Go to the website, go to events. You can go to lipedema-simplified.org or Lipedema-Project.org. It's on both of the websites.
And so they pre-register or?
Yes.
Pre-register.
Okay.
And if you can't make it live, you will have access to all of the talks. And we have a bonus. So we have the essentials of the ketogenic way of eating for lipedema. We have a 6-talk bonus that we're sending out this week. So if it's something you're interested in, sign up this week.
Very cool. And then we'll have the information. You can send it to me and we'll have it in the show notes for everyone. And then how to contact both of you, whatever your best contact is for people who want to help out or learn more. And we can put those in the show notes. Do you want to say, is there anything on social media or email or anything like that you want to just throw out to people who aren't going to look at the show notes?
Catherine, CATHERINE at lipedema-simplified.org is how you can reach me.
And I'm at Leslyn at Lipedema-Project.org.
Awesome. We'll track you down and then we'll see at the conference. And I assume at the conference, I haven't talked to you about it, but are we doing question and answers with the speakers also? Okay, that's what I figured. And so that's great. It's a great time to ask questions like, hey, you didn't mention this. What are we doing about this? And, having Dr. Westman and all these great people there to answer questions that you might have is very valuable. So we'll make sure we get this out.
Brian, having you there is fabulous. We're so excited and thrilled that you're coming and being one of our speakers. Now that we've got you, we're going to keep you.
I'm excited. I usually get invited to things like parties at one time and then they don't invite me back. I don't know why. Maybe it's my personality. But no, I love it. No, I'm honored. When Siobhan asked me, I'm like, sure, I'll do it. Then I didn't hear anything for a long time. I go, oh, maybe she changed her mind. And then she goes, okay, we're doing it. And I think Catherine reached out and I was like, okay, let's do this thing. So it's cool. I mean, I'm really excited and honored to be part of it. And especially something like this where we really need to educate people. And I think when we say, it's funny because when I first started on the ketogenic stuff and low carb, I wasn't no one was really talking about this. No one knew anything about this stuff. And now, people are saying, hey, did you see they have keto stuff at Costco? I'm like, yeah, but I usually don't recommend those things. Eat real food for the most part. But, it's just great how our people are learning. And especially now we're instead of apologizing all the time, saying we're another approach, they'll go, look, this is the best approach for certain things. And I'm seeing the benefit of my patients. So I enjoy what I'm doing in medicine a million times better than what I was doing before.
Yes.
And when you see the patients happy, you're coming smiling and laughing, like, doc, I feel great. This is a social visit. Everything's perfect in life. I'm like, this is fun now because I'm not trying to fix all these. It's not like your ship is sinking and we're putting plugs everywhere trying to keep it floating. I want to go out on your Bayliner and hang out, right, and talk about life rather than all your health problems for 2 hours.
Right.
So, yeah, it's just great. So I'm excited, and you're bringing some great people together, and so I'm excited to be part of it. It's an honor, really. And so, everyone, this is a really important. Share this with your family and friends and people who are struggling, because this conference can really help them, or you, if you're really having these symptoms and go, oh my goodness, this is what I got. Now you finally know. I think we did a good job of discussing what the symptoms are like and how things are different than other forms of weight gain. And also that you may need a more comprehensive approach rather than what you're doing now, and not feel bad that you banged your head against the wall and you tried all this stuff and you haven't succeeded because you really you maybe just didn't have the right approach. So everyone, remember, be kind to yourself, be kind to others, share this with family, and thank you for listening. Thank you for support, and thank you both for joining me. 2 docs on. You outnumbered me this time.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
All right. Have a great weekend. Thank you for joining me. thank you for listening to this episode. We greatly appreciate your support. We would greatly appreciate a positive thumbs up on all of the platforms like iTunes and Spotify or wherever you're listening. And we just thank you for our Patreon supporters. We greatly appreciate your help in getting this message out. We think there's a lot of important information, and hopefully this helps you. Have a great day, and thank you for listening, and thank you for your support.